How will the fate of Putin, Ukraine, and the world change after November 5? Who can influence the resolution of the Russian-Ukrainian war now? Will Russians fight for Kim Jong-un? Have they become a bargaining chip for Putin? How delusional is Gundyayev? Let's discuss this and more. I'm Iryna Uzlova, and joining us is Sergei Aslanyan, journalist and host of Khodorkovsky live programs. Sergei, hello. It's really good to see you. Thank you for taking the time. Putin seems to have found something to pay for those North Koreans who have already arrived in the Kursk region and have been hit by Ukrainian armed forces, as confirmed by our counter-disinformation center. According to former South Korean ambassador to Russia, Wi Sun-luk, Russia can now send its troops to fight for North Korea if Kim Jong-un asks for it. Wi Sun-luk suggests that an exchange coin may have been discussed in the agreements that brought North Koreans to the Kursk region, with the possibility of their presence in Ukraine as well. What else do you think they are exchanging now? This is significant news for South Koreans. Individuals from a different historical context, likely well-mannered and educated, who may have forgotten their history. Despite the proximity of an enemy like Russia, they tried to treat it humanely, providing it with good cars, electronics, and industrial products, supplying much that was useful, metal-intensive, and profitable.
И оснастили Россию, например, хорошими автомобилями, хорошей электроникой, хорошей промышленностью, поставив огромное количество всего очень полезного, металлоемкого и прибыльного.
Russia has never needed to pay back its soldiers for geopolitical interests while getting approval by signing some treaties.
Русские солдаты и советские солдаты воевали в Анголе.
Did Soviet soldiers require special arrangements to fight in Angola? No. It's just that Russia said, the Soviet Union said, that's it. They're going to go there now. They sent military advisors who then pretended to be just consultants, but actually took part in the fighting. For a Soviet soldier, for example, to fight in Xinjiang in the 30s, i.e. practically 90 years ago, no agreements, no special inferences, or at least reference points of legal certainty and coherence were required. The Soviet Union simply said, our army is at war, and the army went there. It was not there, of course, because the army, which was conventionally called Altai, came there. This conflict began in 1999 in the troubled Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, home to a Muslim population that is not Han and thus not considered fully Chinese. This has led to ongoing inter-ethnic, inter-religious, and geopolitical tensions. The Soviet Union intervened by sending a fully equipped army, including combat aviation, artillery, and infantry. And to avert suspicion, they said, this army, these thousands of people, these generals, no, it's not the Red Army, it's the Altaians. Well, do you know such a state as Altai? No, you haven't heard? Well, the state doesn't exist, but it has an army, and Soviet soldiers shed blood killing the Chinese. Hell, wherever. Yeah. What the hell for? For what? Well, the party said, the world proletarian revolution, even if there is no proletariat, will enter the new states on bayonets for the happiness of the people. When the Red Army entered Xinjiang in 1931 and in 1934, different contingents and different configurations were present. It was encountered that the local chief, who might have raised some sort of revolt against the central government, the remoteness allowed him to do so, had a personal guard of white guards, Colonel Popingut. Naturally, Colonel Popingut was immediately shot, but the cadres of his regiment were left behind, deciding, we will not be Altaians, but will become Popinguts. Therefore, in 1934, the Red Army reshaped its uniforms, buckled on the epaulettes, and distributed to its commanders the ranks of lieutenant, sub-lieutenant, and staff captain. In the archives, there are amazing reports how the company Communist Ivanov conducted a political training. Imagine eclecticism of the 30s. The documents were preserved because they were dressed up in someone else's clothes. Then the war ended ignominiously, and the Red Army got out of there. But to fight, for example, in Korea from 1950 to 1953, nothing special was required. They just came. There were no infantry then, only aviation, because the Koreans had almost no aviation, except for Po-2s and grenades, which they threw manually through the window. Soviet aircraft were based with the Chinese, and from there they flew across the Chinese border, avoiding attacks on their bases. There was no official war with China, and the Americans did not claim China. So the Red Army stationed its military advisors and combat pilots who fought the American Air Force, because the South Korean Air Force was weak. Thus, two aviation groups fought in the skies over Korea: the UN forces, represented by the Americans, and the Soviet Army's combat aviation.
Войск ООН, потому что американцы представляли не Соединенные Штаты Америки, а представляли войска ООН, а с другой стороны им противостояла боевая авиация советской армии. То есть в Корее это уже было. И поэтому, когда нужно будет прислать туда...
This was already the case in Korea, so if aviation, air defense, missile defense forces, chemical or electronic warfare troops, or infantry are needed now, no problem. At all times, this cooperation did not require ratification of treaties, but they got into the war anyway, ostensibly interceding, without seriously stipulating the treaties. And now, finally, there is an official document on full, comprehensive military cooperation in case of conflict. But this is not a new scenario. The Russian soldier who drowned the Great French Revolution in blood under Suvorov, crossing the Alps, did not negotiate with France either.
Идущий в крови топить Великую Французскую революцию под предводительством полководца Суворова и переходя через Альпы, потому что Суворов через Альпы перся для того, чтобы залить кровью Французскую революцию, как жандарм Европы. Для этого тоже не требовалось, например, договариваться с Францией.
France, we're going to send an expeditionary corps to you now to punish you, because we think it's necessary. The Russian soldier is specifically for this. He fights in any country because the Russian Tsar deems it necessary, and the fact that he may now find himself in Korea is merely a historical habit, not news. For fed-up South Koreans, this is news. For Russia, this is a long-standing page in the textbook. This has always been the case. Yes, in principle, it will surprise few people and will not induce anyone to do anything, as far as I understand Russian society. They will silently go to war for Kim Jong-un, for some unknown purpose, maybe for money, or as part of some of Putin's next delusions. They will silently go to war for Kim Jong-un. And what? It will not affect any processes. The only word that is out of context is society. There is no society in Russia. Among the subordinate peasants and draught people, society is formed when they realize that they are ready to act in some kind of protest, even if it is not bright, not with a Molotov cocktail. And this minimum at all times in Russia went to the Cossacks, for example. To the Kuban, where the Cossacks actually came from. They were those who did not want to be recruits for 25 years, those who did not want to stay under the Baron, to be beaten every Saturday at the stables for no reason. All those who were against it went into the Cossacks, and now they are in exile. The rest will go quietly, because in Russia society is not formed. There are no signs of society. There are people who will go wherever they are sent. Since Putin's time, a new approach to armed conflicts involves payment. In the past, soldiers would fight, return home, and face death without clear reasons or purposes. Throughout the 20th century, this pattern persisted, as seen in the 4-year conflict in Xinjiang, which lasted for decades overall. Similarly, the Russo-Japanese War and the struggle for Port Arthur raise questions about their true purpose. We should have gone to the same Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, where the war lasted, the combat phase, 4 years, and before and after actually lasted for decades. A Russian man would go there, swear, buy vodka, and get his tobacco allowance, 350. And now you can try. If you survive, count on 1,000 euros, or maybe even 10,000 euros, and the lucky ones even dream about it. But if you don't make it in time and step on a landmine, you'll get your head ripped off. Nevertheless, a Russian man is good at drinking anything, fighting anyone, and going anywhere. So in the absence of society, of course, these people will end up in a war somewhere in Korea, which they have never even heard of. They will be surprised to find out that there are 2 of them, one northern and one southern. If needed, they will intervene in Yemen or support Iran against perceived Israeli aggression towards the Islamic democracy. Russia's geopolitical conflicts reflect a society that doesn't question its actions. Patriarch Kirill Gundyayev, a former FSB officer, suggests reinstating the death penalty, believing it's what society deserves. Kirill Gundyaev's arguments lack grounding in reality or religion. At a meeting with occupiers he blessed to kill, he further supports their actions, claiming that Jesus Christ did not condemn the death penalty and that Scripture permits murder. He fails to consider that such proposals could eventually backfire on him. This is why the death penalty, which has not been ratified, is under embargo in Russia. Putin suspects its possible use against himself, after all. When he is shot, though, it won't require a law, and he expects in vain that it will come as a result of some court decision. When the death penalty exists, it will be carried out. That's just how some Muammar Gaddafi will be calmly shot. 15-year-old Gavrila Principal, passing by, saw a crowd mocking a slightly bruised body. The right to enforce such a law is unlikely under Putin, but given that it would require a collegial decision, there is significant anxiety among the leaders. If the death penalty is enacted, it could potentially turn against them. Gundyayev is not truly a religious figure. He acts more as a minister of orthodoxy, with associated privileges and protections. In this war, for example, such a phenomenon as a regimental priest is the order of the day. At all times, for faith, Tsar, and fatherland, a Russian soldier would go into battle, and he would have a regimental priest to bless him, go and kill. When, for example, there was an interfaith conflict, you had to kill some Buddhists or Japanese, who were pagans despite all their Buddhist attributes, or Muslims. It seemed pretty justified one way or another. A person who was in favor of faith would come and say, look, go kill everyone else, because their faith is inappropriate. People are the same, basically, and they feel and worry and want to live the same way. But, they have a slightly different symbol. For example, they have a star of the wrong configuration, or a crescent moon. Go and kill. I bless you. Now it's more complicated, as they must kill their own Orthodox Christians. Regimental priests have become part of the army in this war. Gundyayev claims that murder is legitimate for Christians in various situations, reflecting a practice that's long been in place. A priest endorses murder in the name of an unknown cause. It is this death penalty as an extrajudicial killing that legitimizes it. Now the Minister of Orthodoxy discusses this. His actions reveal a complete lack of morality, as he is far removed from genuine orthodoxy and faith, merely using its symbols for his own purposes. Regarding Pussy Riot, this performance at Christ the Savior Cathedral on Easter, he favored forgiveness and humanism, but supported punishment under criminal law, not orthodox principles. When sentences were handed down, FSB General Gundyayev had the final say. Patriarch Kirill, acting as both a minister of orthodoxy and a general, called for punishment despite orthodoxy's emphasis on forgiveness. What connection does he have to true orthodoxy? Orthodoxy is irrelevant to him, just as ballet is to me. Let's move on to November 5th, which we're all anticipating. While the world waits, we continue discussing. Andriy Yermak, head of the President of Ukraine's office, believes that no future U.S. president or candidate will surrender Ukraine to Putin. Well, as much as I have a thing for ballet, none. Sergei, moving on. We are all watching November 5th, of course, in anticipation. Now we see that the information world has even frozen, but we are not frozen. We are discussing it. Andriy Yermak, head of the Ukrainian president's office, is convinced that none of the presidents, candidates, whoever becomes the new head of the White House, will surrender Ukraine and will not be ready to give Putin a victory. And are you sure about that? The EU believes that any new president, such as the incredibly smart Kamala Harris or the even more eccentric and original Donald Trump, will definitely surrender Ukraine, withdraw from the agreements, and refuse aid. That's why the EU is now in a frenzy of panic talk about creating its own EU troops, in spite of NATO troops, which are of no use. Because they are well aware of what will happen next. Whichever American president enters the Oval Office, he will most likely surrender Europe, and we will have to solve this problem one-on-one. Europe realizes that it will have a very hard time, because even NATO is, after all, a European structure based on the American base. NATO, if you ask America 1,000 times, means that it needs its own EU army, its own military bloc, which, even if it allows Ukraine to lose, will try to stop the enemy further on the outskirts, on the borders of Poland and the Baltic states. That is, even the EU is ready for the fact that it will have to surrender Ukraine. But still, they themselves would not want to receive Russian tanks and liberator soldiers who came to Poland for washing machines. So perhaps we need to move. This shows to what extent they are panicking about what is happening in the White House and in this election, when America is great and there is no one to choose from. Because one or the other does not fit at all with the current monstrous state of planet Earth. The most important country on planet Earth may now, in front of the eyes of the entire world, lose its status and its ability to resolve all issues, whatever they may arise. Historically, America has influenced world wars, but its current president seems incapacitated. China complicates matters, and politicians appear to be losing their negotiating skills. CNN reports that Putin is not interested in negotiations with future U.S. presidents, driven by his territorial ambitions. With the possibility of Trump returning, who believes he can negotiate with Putin? Uncertainty looms, especially since Trump has suggested he might bomb the Kremlin if talks fail. And is anyone willing to make Putin, or at least some of his entourage, find someone agreeable, not on a merismatic acceptance of reality? American intelligence is well informed about Russia and Kremlin negotiations, evident from significant leaks. Notable scandals include a spy from Putin's administration traveling to the U.S. to receive an American passport and security detail while revealing details about the Russian government. That is, there are agencies there are ways to work with leaks, and the Russian government, of course, in this respect is very leaky and very controlled. But for all that, in Russia, it is possible to choose someone to put in jail, for example, instead of Putin, to negotiate behind Putin's back, to give him a little more trump cards to play against Putin. But with the most important desire to seriously deal with this problem, you have to realize that the Therians are ready to spend their resources and their people on Putin, on conflict, on war. For example, take and spend 500,000 Germans. They will be killed because they will be the soldiers who will solve this conflict with weapons.
Готовы свои ресурсы и своих людей тратить на Путина, на конфликт, на войну, на Украину. Например, взять и потратить 500 000 немцев. Их убьют, потому что они будут солдатами, которые будут решать этот конфликт при помощи оружия. Жалко.
Is this pathetic? Billions from the economy have been flowing for 2 years without changing the war situation. We need to take this seriously, step back from the table, assess the map, and focus on dealing with Russia and America. The solution cannot be trying to cultivate an agent within Putin's inner circle. It is necessary to give weapons to Ukraine. It's not Ukrainian soldiers who need retraining, but the generals. We must restructure the army and Ukraine itself, moving beyond the you didn't meet all the requirements approach regarding EU and NATO membership. Instead, we should work with Ukraine to ensure compliance in practice and performance. This includes addressing military armaments, supplies, and building new factories. Rheinmetall in Germany needs to establish multiple factories for missiles, shells, and tanks due to shortages. America must also deplete its arsenals in preparation for what could be the final battle of World War III, which poses a threat to the planet. This issue requires urgent attention.
Снарядов, танков, потому что их просто физически не хватает. И Америка должна распотрошить свои арсеналы, потому что наступает последний цивилизационный бой Третьей мировой войны, после которого, возможно, и планета Земля не останется. И это тоже часть вопросов.
We need to establish agents in the Kremlin and prepare for a conspiracy. Our presence in Russia must be strong enough to support a coup, assassination attempt, or political instability when necessary. This cannot be done from the outside. Help will not arrive in time. A deeper level of involvement in the issue is essential.
Политическую нестабильность. Это снаружи не делается. Самолет не прилетит. И голубой вертолет тоже, в котором кино тебе покажут, не прилетит.
We're putting off all issues. With elections, weekends, concerts, and the Oscars, life goes on. The Soviet Union always claimed the West would attack, but the West has no need to. Look at how people in Western countries, Germans, French, Italians, Dutch, Swedes, Portuguese, Spaniards, live. Why would they want to go to Soviet Russia?
Номинации на Оскар. У нас вообще нормальная жизнь. Вот когда Советский Союз всегда говорил о том, что Запад нападет, Запад не нападет, потому что ему это не нужно, потому что...
Why will they lay down their lives to conquer the latrine, to defeat the collective farm? Why do they need it? They have a luxurious life. This luxurious life somehow, with all the difficulties, it remains. America has a luxurious life. Hundreds of thousands, 3,000, 400,000, 500,000 people a year sneak into America to stay there, no matter what kind of immigrants.
Шикарная жизнь. У Америки шикарная жизнь. Сотни тысяч.
Each year, up to 500,000 people come to America because they can only thrive there. So, will they go to war? No. To address these issues, we need to deeply engage with them. One aspect of this scenario could involve someone in Putin's inner circle, akin to Lenin, who might rise with support from the German General Staff to undermine impoverished Russia and provoke revolution. Apparently, in a few days, some part of Soviet society will celebrate November 7th, the red day of the calendar. To make such a scenario impossible to repeat, that is why Putin invented the image of an enemy of the people. That is why the first thing that is being destroyed is the facts of foreign presence. These are political organizations. These are international foundations. This is the presence of international organizations in Russia. There should be no humanitarian aid in any case, because it is clear that next time they will find another Grandpa Lenin somewhere, wash him, clean him, feed him, give him a drink, and bring him back to make a revolution with their money. Of course, one of the options is considered, it is taken into account, but in no case, first of all, it is not the main one, and secondly, no one is seriously working on it. There is no preparation activity now where some kind of personnel changes can be made within Russia. By putting up a very weighty, not even necessarily new, but nevertheless worthy, respected, large-caliber figure capable of competing with Putin in order to overtake power, seize power, take away power. It can't happen, and there is no such job. Or maybe it can be left? Do you think there's no chance?
И нет такой работы, тем более, что Путин вот как раз именно этого-то больше всего и боится, как Сталин. Они оба, в первую очередь, сканируют свое окружение. А кто здесь сегодняшний мой друг, завтра, может быть, мне в бок перо вставит? Кто-то из своих, начиная от охранников, поварихи и заканчивая, Алину Кабаеву вычеркиваем, любого Сечина и любого Миллера, находящегося рядом.
Kabaeva is so primitive that, in principle, she is trainable. She has a very good food-grasping reflex. And by aggravating it, it is possible, of course, to take her to the polling station along this candy path, like Chukcha, and achieve the necessary and very important decision. But in principle, Abai's most important thing is motivation. That is, however primitive it may be, but motivation in sociology and science is the starting point for the study of behavior. So if there is no motivation, it will be more difficult to create it. And to feed her dosa, she already can't fit into the TV. Yeah, so what? Is she eating? Is she consuming? What other grasping reflexes are developed? We will not mention in our cultural program. We are above this level. Yeah, no motive, no brains.
Обозреватель Foreign Affairs Ричард Хаас говорит о том, что Украине и ее союзникам стоит признать для деоккупации Крыма и Донбасса нам требуются силы примерно.
The columnist argues that Ukraine and its allies must acknowledge the need for forces 3 times larger and more combat-ready than those of Russia to deoccupy Crimea and Donbass. Returning to the 1991 borders is deemed impossible, so the U.S. and its allies should push Kyiv to negotiate with the Kremlin, providing a clear strategy. Alternatively, allowing long-range weapons to strike within Russia could accelerate the deoccupation of Crimea and Donbass. Is this move, a day from now, a month from now, 6 months from now, in January, from someone the US, Britain, Germany, France, worth counting on, or already what? The chaos still comes from the old Soviet doctrine. Wall to wall, whoever gets stabbed in the brain wins. This is the wrong strategy. Modern warfare is very different from the notion formed on a desk when Haas puts out tin soldiers and sees who has the most and wins. And it is won precisely by skill, not numbers, and we can see that. Israel is the best proof of that, because there are 230 million Arabs against 10 million Jews. Who is who? Yes. And try to swallow this Israel. It's like a bone in the throat. It's like a bone in your throat, you can never get it in your mouth, because the task comes so hard that no Arabs can't get enough. There's Iran now, for example. It is now entirely lacking air defense and bracing for Israel's actions against the six. Israel is using technology to address issues that the Soviet Union traditionally explained through sheer numbers. Quantity matters, but it's not the main factor. In modern warfare, a well-trained and equipped soldier proves to be far more effective. Europe remains unsure about the necessity of its involvement and the potential loss of face if Ukraine fails. There's indecision about military presence, and when convenient, they use the argument that Russia's numerical advantage makes victory unlikely. Ukraine requires a numerical superiority of 1 to 3 to succeed, but its army is currently around 200,000 to 300,000. France has the largest army in Europe, with the UK and Germany having smaller forces. To engage in this war effectively, Ukraine needs to increase its military through a specific program and budget, ensuring the army is well trained and ready for deployment, which may take about 10 years. This reflects America's dominance as the number one power, explaining why nothing will change and no one will go to war. There simply aren't enough resources or willingness to fight for others. We are invaluable and will persevere. In America, there's a narrative urging Ukraine to surrender due to being outnumbered, similar to the pressure on Israel. However, just because we are fewer doesn't mean we will surrender or lose.
Нет. От того, что нас в нации нобелевских лауреатов меньше,
Israel shows that it has a surprising solution to every absolute trick, because Israel has nothing simple. It has everything ingenious. This whole war is an amazing technology and factors of application. Israel's appearance in this war is ingenious because everything they do is amazing.
Удивительные технологии и факторы применения и появления на этой войне израильской гениальности.
That is, starting from the fact that every soldier in the infantry order acts very unconventionally. They have a different army, they think in a completely different, original way. And that's why Iran, which considers us 80 million, yes, we listen, we're just going to crush. Even if we just spit in the direction of Israel, it's already drowned. Are we accordingly great? No, you are 80 million fools. Not only are you not great, you are also weak. The Soviet Union deployed S-300 complexes, while Israel lacks long-range aviation and sufficient refueling tankers, only 4 for its entire air force. Despite this, Israel managed to refuel a strike group in the air and bombed Iran's air defenses, which had already been neutralized by their suppression systems. The Iranians were blind, and then they were deaf, and then their heads were blown off because they were Israelis. Everyone knew very well that the Israelis did not have such opportunities. They would not fly in any case, but they did. There's nothing else. And Ukraine, yes, it would have won this war if these weapons that are coming would be each with a certificate. I authorize you to win this war. And since this handbook says, here's a rocket for you, it says here, don't win the war, with a stamp and a signature, then, accordingly, we have to say that there are more Russians. There are more of them than Ukrainians. There are more of them than Europeans. By the way, probably, just in case, let there be more of them than Americans. So everyone should stand, be afraid, Russia is coming, but we are not standing. We are not afraid, and we are fighting back. In modern technological warfare, the number of troops, whether Russian, Korean, or Iranian, won't deter us from defending our legitimate borders. Time is limited, and as noted by sources like the Wall Street Journal, Iran is once again threatening Israel with more powerful weapons than before.
Не так у нас много времени, но, Сергей, мы уже упомянули Израиль, Иран, и не только. Wall Street Journal тоже упомянула и Иран, и Израиль. Там пишут о том, что Иран грозится нанести новый удар по Израилю, используя более мощное оружие, чем...
Is this just intimidation, too?
С разряда «стой, бояться», и на самом деле просто запугать, но будет атака.
Iran's threats may lead to an attack, but Israel will repel it. What is Iran hoping to achieve with these scare tactics? Iran has two enemies. The first enemy is the Iranian people, and the second enemy is Israel. So we need to keep both enemies in fear, and the enemy within the country is more frightening. It's no coincidence that Iran has three armies, two of which are in this monstrous religious state. Well, who asked them? They help Israel all the time. There are a lot of precision targeting, a lot of amazing results of Tsahal's capacity on Iranian territory, because the fifth column is huge. A lot of Iranians are for Israel, not because they don't like Israel.
Удивительных результатов дееспособности Цахала на территории Ирана, потому что пятая колонна огромная. Очень много иранцев за Израиль.
They dislike their government, the next Ayatollah, and religious morality in principle. To instill fear, they were told that the Iranian Ayatollah is the most peace-loving in the world, and if
Иранский аятолла — это самый миролюбивый аятолла в мире. Если он сейчас сочтет нужным стереть с лица земли Израиль, то мир во всем мире наконец-то воцарится, и у них для этого есть ракеты, потому что разве может быть мирная религия и мирная страна, решающая свои вопросы не при помощи ракет?
Israelis aren't actually afraid, but the propaganda aims to create an illusion of fear.
Но пропаганда, она на том и построена, она как раз специально для того, чтобы создавать иллюзию.
And we see that Iran is a country that seems to be submissive, and then an 18-year-old girl is beaten to death in a police station for wearing the wrong clothes, coming from the province to the capital. Suddenly, it turns out that the whole of Iran explodes instantly. All these submissive, unhappy Muslim women. Suddenly it turns out that each of them is a person. Each of them is not a slave. She is not going to submit to this weighty thing at all. Women tear off their hijabs, burn them, and defy the authorities, who no longer know how to respond. These are enraged women, suddenly rebelling against the sacred, despite being forced into a life with lowered eyes and silenced voices.
Это когда ты вся в тряпках замотанная, глаза в землю, и вообще-то попробуй рот открыть. Это же шикарно. Они, оказывается, против. Но в стране, в которой на протяжении с 79-го года невозможно не чихнуть без разрешения, невозможно, в принципе...
They reject it, and in a country where every move requires permission, such mass protests show that propaganda is failing, that people are unbroken and unafraid. Now they're being threatened with missiles and promises to wipe Israel off the map, though it seems the fear lies with those making the threats. Sergei, thank you for the conversation, your position, and your precision. Thank you. See you again. Glory to Ukraine, glory to our heroes. This was Sergei Aslanyan, journalist and host of Kharkiv Leak, always interesting with historical comparisons and a view of the future in which we will definitely win. Iryna Uzlova spoke with him. Thank you for your likes and comments. Please leave them when watching the recording. Subscribe to Sergei's YouTube channel, link in the description, and support the armed forces of Ukraine. See you, and we will win.